Hello. I've heard from several sources that the Steak and Stein restaurant on Yonge Street in Halifax is either going to close or has already closed. Since it opened, it has become my favorite restaurant in the city. And I have a story of an interesting encounter and a story of friendship of some sorts that comes out of that. And the story goes something like this. It had been the end of a trying day, at the end of a trying week at the office. I enjoyed my work. I enjoyed the people that I worked with. But there's always comes the time when, for whatever reason, things do not go smoothly. And this had been a particularly difficult week. I exited my office and then exited the main office on the top floor of Yonge Street Tower. And I made my way over to the stairwell and propelled myself down to the ground floor. I stepped outside into a mid-September, late afternoon sun. And I was feeling that I really didn't want to walk home and prepare supper from scratch. So I decided that I would let the Steak and Stein cook my supper. I walked across the street and made my entrance and walked up to the reception desk. A young lady asked, "Table for one?" She picked up a single menu and led me to a two-person booth on the main floor. I opened up the menu to look at it, but it was unnecessary because I already knew what I was going to order. Presently, a young waitress came over with pen and pad in hand. "Are you ready to order?" she asked. And I put in my order for a Delmonico steak, derby style, well done, with French fries and a side order of gravy. "And something to drink, perhaps?" she asked. And I said, "Yes, I would like a glass of white wine." So she made some more notes on her pad and said, "I will be back." And I said, "I'm sure." It seemed like only seconds, but it was probably a minute or two, and she returned with the glass of wine. And I then shoved across the bench and braced against the wall and the back of the bench into a comfortable position and took a few sips of wine and began to feel a little more comfortable. Later on, I ordered a cup of coffee. And when the waitress asked me if there was anything else that I wanted, I said no. So she said that she would be back with the bill and that I needn't hurry because it wasn't particularly busy. So I sipped on my coffee, went to pay my bill, and I left. By that time, it was almost dark outside, but I felt revived and invigorated, and so I made my way home. This one-time decision to go to Steak and Stein for Friday night supper turned out to be a habit of sorts. Not every week, because often the crowd from the office would decide that somewhere in the world there must be some reason to celebrate something. So we would all trot off to the pub a few moments walk away from the office. And sometimes also I would accompany my sister down here for a weekend family visit. But nonetheless, I did return on a regular basis, so it became, as I say, kind of a habit. After about the second or third time, I began to notice that almost before I was settled in, a glass of white wine would appear on my table. And I would look around, but whoever put it there had already disappeared because the people there were quick on their feet. And also, at about the same time, this same waitress that had served me the first time would come over and sit down in the booth opposite me on the other side of the booth, and we would carry on the conversation. And this is something that happened on a regular basis. And even if she was not serving me, as long as she was there, she would either bring me a glass of wine or have someone else do it. And she would also come over for a conversation, regardless of the situation. So as time went on, I began to kind of expect this and be somewhat disappointed if it didn't happen. And I would know at that time that she would be off shift. This happened for about perhaps a year. And at one point that I was in there and she came down for a conversation, she was describing a party that she was going to, her and her friends. And she described where it was going to occur and some more details about it. And I was thinking, I wonder if she's trying to offer an invitation. But I dismissed it somewhat because I was reaching for my 60th rung on the age ladder. And I doubt if she had even cleared 30. So I thought it might not be quite appropriate. So I did not follow up on that to see if there was an invitation there. But as I walked home, I thought about it as to whether or not I should show up anyway. But I decided in the end not to. And I decided in the end that I kind of regretted it. It was about a month later before I got a chance to go back and to be in coincidence with one of her shifts. And as usual, there was a glass of wine that appeared on my table almost as soon as I was seated. And as usual, she came over to sit down to chat. Towards the end, she hesitated a moment and said that she had decided to move to Toronto. She had a brother who lived there and she wanted to go check out to see what Toronto was like. I listened with interest, but tried not to show anything else other than interest. As I left to pay my bill, I looked around to see if she was still there, and I couldn't see her. But before I left, she appeared at the doorway, and we exchanged some last-time pleasantries. And I was out the door, and I walked away. About a year after that, our office moved from Yonge Street to Chebucto Road, so I didn't have the opportunity to go there for supper as much as before. And when I retired in 2005, of course, I moved to here, so the opportunity to go was even less than before. But if I went to visit my sister and her husband to stay for a weekend in Halifax, which I often did, we almost always ended up going to Steak and Stein. And even after all the years since, up until 2019, at the beginning of the pandemic, that was the last time I was ever there. But even at the last, I'd almost half expect, maybe even a little almost hope, that a glass of white wine would be set down on the table in front of me, even before I had a chance to settle in. Good night.